if we can make an improvement of 1%, right, that's almost $1 trillion being added to the global economy. That's what a global data set backed by the power of AI and everything else that's happening. That's the value that's being created here.
Hey, welcome back to Emphasis Tech Talks, the podcast for business leaders leveraging cutting-edge technology to raise their bottom lines. I'm your host, David Clausen of Emphasis Tech. Our guest today is Daniel Faber, CEO at Orbit Fab, Inc. Orbit is Daniel's fourth startup. He'll share his thoughts on advancements in space refueling and AI dock. Be sure to listen closely, though, for comments about space tow trucks and garbage collection. This stuff is going to be out of this world, so buckle up. Be sure to stick around. Like and subscribe to make sure you get notified of future videos as they're released. Hey, Daniel, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you being on. So, this is like, what, your fourth startup? Something like that? Is that right? Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, David. Great to be here. Yeah, I'm on startup number 4. I did an engineering degree in Australia and decided that we should get humans off Earth. That'd be a fun career and something impactful for the world. Settling space, and so I built a dozen satellites and then started building companies.
Awesome. So were the other 3 were they space related? I know this one is, but were the other 3 in that same sector? Or?
All sort of spinning off or inspired by the things that I was thinking around the space industry. I decided when I was in undergrad that wrote down a list of industries I thought might pay for the first permanent jobs in space, and that list was tourism and mining. I didn't think I was a tour operator, so I've been chipping away at the idea of asteroid mining. So the first startup was actually instrumentation for the mining industry, the terrestrial mining industry. And high-speed internet for Antarctica. We built the first Ka band transponder for really, really small satellites. And then ostensibly an asteroid mining company, Deep Space Industries. What we built was small thrusters, small engines to move the satellites around in orbit. And now Orbit Fab, gas stations in space.
So, so how is the space industry different? And of course, for our audience, we're thinking about technology and how we can leverage the data and the technology to improve our business. So kind of from that perspective, how is the space industry different?
From a business perspective, it's not, right? You need to have customers. You need to find the best talent. You need to deliver on those contracts. There's no magical pixie dust. But from an environmental perspective, it's different, right? You can get that data for understanding the world because you've got the perspective. You can see everything from space. But that environment then comes with various hazards, right? It's not a pure vacuum in orbit. There's radiation, there's atomic oxygen in low orbits, there's magnetic fields. Because you're in a near vacuum, you've got interesting thermal effects, and then you're going into eclipse and sunshine cycles, so the thermal cycling. You've just got to think through everything carefully because we're really unfamiliar with the environment. So that's one of the biggest problems. But a lot of the challenge of starting a business in the space industry is the same as any other industry. Have you found a market? Is a market big enough? Have you got a product that people want to buy? And that counts whether it's data, whether it's you're selling the satellites, whether like us, you're selling the fuel.
Right. Well, that makes sense. That there are those core components that relate to every business. So there's been some growth in the space industry. What do you think is driving that growth?
Yeah, we've seen huge growth. When I started in this industry 25 years ago, the rockets are all disposable. They'd launch the rockets and throw them away. And you can imagine if you did that with aircraft, how ridiculously expensive a flight would be. I often joke, I grew up in Australia, if it cost as much to get to Australia as it cost to get to space, I wouldn't have this accent. So what I've seen over 25 years, though, is we now have reusable rockets and the cost has come down, right? Microelectronics are better and we can do more in small packages, and that helps us iterate, like lower access costs and being able to do more. We can iterate and find product market fit. And all of a sudden, it became accessible to the VC investors. So small enough amount of capital, they could fund it to find markets like in the remote sensing with optical and then radar and then lidar and various other things. And now a whole bunch of infrastructure we're going to be able to build on. So the drop in cost from the launches has been the biggest one. What we're trying to bring on with fuel is of course reusable satellites. Just like SpaceX made the rockets reusable, we want to be known for making the satellites reusable. That's going to result in the same kind of paradigm shift on cost. And if we can get to a completely upgradable satellite where you just need to put the payloads on it, we can get the costs down to the point where it makes sense to move most of global telecoms into space, right? And where we can gather more and more data to understand exactly what's going on in the world, improve the decisions people have made. If we can make an improvement of 1%, right, that's almost $1 trillion being added to the global economy. That's what a global data set backed by the power of AI and everything else that's happening. That's the value that's being created here.
Wow. And so, what would you say are some of the unique challenges that you're facing uh, in trying to reach some of those goals that you just mentioned?
Yeah, like I said, we've got the same challenges as all startups, right? We've got to get talent. We've got to nail our customers. The unique challenges that come in the space industry are around the environmental considerations. Our hardware has to survive, but also it takes a long time still to get to orbit, right? The time and the cost has come down, but it's not like I can have an idea on Monday and test it in the lab on Friday. Unfortunately, I've still got a 1 or 2 year delay before I can test it in orbit. That's got to come down. It does mean you've got to think through the market, and you're carrying more risk for longer. So I've been spending 25 years trying to figure out like what are the business models that we can apply a minimum viable product for, what are the business models we can finance reasonably well, and that we can discover our market quickly. And I think that for Orbit Fab, we were absolutely lucky that we set the company up just before Space Force set up, and they realized that they're going to need fuel if they're going to prevail in orbit. Right? You can dodge 10 cannonballs and run out of fuel, you're in trouble. But if you've got a fuel supply, you can outmaneuver somebody today, and you're not a sitting duck tomorrow. And so they're desperate for fuel. So that's really helped us. Like we managed to find that market and the customer and the government that was prepared to put down some money up front to reduce our capital requirements. So these are some of the challenges. And then you've got the other side, which is talent, right? The space industry is growing rapidly. There's a huge demand for talent right now. And so we set up in Silicon Valley and decided it was hard to hire aerospace engineers there. We moved to Colorado, lots more aerospace engineers here, great ecosystem, lots of customers around and the like. That's been absolutely fantastic. We now got 60 odd people here in Colorado. Yeah, great workforce really matters.
Well, so how does technology come to play in all of that? So, how are you leveraging technology to help advance and work through some of those challenges?
Yeah, as a space company, technology is fundamental to everything we do to be able to operate in space. Um, and we are leveraging off everything that's been done before, like the reusable rockets and all of the communications infrastructure, the ground network infrastructure, everything that exists. What we're adding to that is the ability to refuel and make the satellites reusable so that people can build off what we're doing. We add another layer of tech and capability. So that's been absolutely critical. For running the company, just like any other business, we need sound solutions for manufacturing. Everything now is integrated with the CRM and the data systems across the operations and the like, the accounting systems and everything has to link together. You can run a more efficient business if everything like that works. We have the challenge working with the government that everything has to be really tight on cybersecurity because there are other folks in the world that would like to know what we're up to and what our customers are up to. So that adds a challenge. Trying to run an AI system when I can't have any data go outside of a FedRAMP compliant system is a challenge. And they're building those, but they lag behind what tools you see in an environment where you don't have to worry so much about these things. So that's one of the challenges that just comes not necessarily with the space industry, but with working with the parts of the government that we are.
Right. I know. Yeah, we've dealt with some of that, not in the space industry necessarily, but in oil and gas, medical. There's a lot of constraints that come into play there. So let's talk about the international aspect. So you're officing in Westminster, Colorado, right? and uh, but you have a international footprint. Is that right? And talk to me about that, how that complicates things, and how you work through that.
Yeah, we have now we're up to about 60 odd people here in Colorado. We've got a dozen in the UK, and that was an interesting move. My previous companies, I set up a subsidiary in Europe, and I'll just be honest, I did that too early, right? We didn't have the culture anchored. We didn't have critical mass so there were people that could handle that. So I was up at all hours trying to make phone calls and get people hired and the like. We also didn't start with a strong person who was very much independent, fire and forget, who could run that office. And so that was a real challenge. This time I said, look, I'm not going until we're ready and until we find somebody who can run that office and build it up from zero to at least to a dozen or so. And we found that. In fact, the reason we chose to set up in the UK was mostly because of the guy that we found, Manny Shah, to run that. He'd previously built a team up to that sort of 10 or 12. He's well known and respected in a lot of the space industry in Europe. And he's been fantastic. And then he grew that up to a spot and found his replacement. We hired the former chief of staff of the UK Space Agency, who has just been phenomenal at continuing that growth. So that's been the key is the people on the ground on the other side of the world across that many time zones. The people to be able to take that vision, be able to help you shape the strategy, and then just execute without needing to have you on the call all the time is great.
Yeah, I've found that as well. If you're going to have your team that spread out, um, it's critical that they're able to work independently, even though you have a little bit of overlap, and you can beef up on communications and so forth. But they're going to have to be able to go run with it when you're not necessarily available.
Yeah, and the tools are now available to be able to do that across borders and independent of geography a lot better. Of course, we're building hardware, and to build hardware, the people who touch that have to be on site. It helps a lot. So that does make a challenge. We've been able to divide the projects quite nicely. So the UK are working on specific aspects of the technology, while here in Colorado we're working on others that are complementary and all fit the same strategy, without requiring constant the teams to be in the same room. So that's been important and super beneficial.
So, how do you go about recruiting that kind of a very talented team and being able to keep those valued team members engaged? What are some of the tips you could give our audience
If you're
in that
starting
respect?
up a if you're starting up a company on day zero, you hire your friends, right? You hire people you know, people in your network. Um, you run out of them eventually. Things are successful, and then all of a sudden it becomes more of a challenge. So now you're hiring your friends' friends, right? And word of mouth gets you some way. Offer an incentive and create a good work environment, and people will be attracted to that, right? An interesting job with good high quality people with a good culture, that really attracts folks. But then for some positions, we've also used recruiters, and I've found what we typically do is a couple of cycles with for our senior positions where we start talking with prospective candidates and we're doing it internally, and it helps us learn what the position should be. Right? And when we've satisfied ourselves, we know what the position is and we know what the absolute rock star in that position would be. Then we go to a recruiter and say, hire us exactly this, right? Because they're a unicorn, because I'm a small company and every person has to be hitting above their weight. I need exactly this person and I don't have them in my network. Go and find one. And we've had a decent success rate, probably 80%, 75, 80% of the people we've hired through recruiters when we've done that process have been absolutely outstanding.
Well, yeah. We I have found over the years that having good relationships with the recruiters uh, will pay you back in spades. I know often they get a little bit of a bad name, bad rep here and there, but they're absolutely critical when you're looking for very specific skill sets and so forth. Uh, it's really important. And can you maybe describe for us a project you've been through? Obviously, a number of projects with your current organization and previous ones, I'm sure. Uh, can you describe a project that maybe had extra challenges and was not necessarily going the way that it should? And how did you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, and every complex endeavor ends up having challenges. And satellites, I've actually seen a joke from the engineers on the standard spacecraft bitterness curve, which starts in the region of euphoria when you sign the contract and progresses through to blind hatred as you reach certain stages and everything is late. and
Right.
and I've only seen a couple of projects that have not followed that roughly. um, yeah, it's complex projects. You always end up having to trade off of requirements, and if you've got, especially if you've got partners out of the company, when you have to trade across to find the best systems solution, where somebody has to give up something, either give up on their requirements or do the work to reduce the mass, to reduce the power consumption, to increase the power availability. Like you're working at these kind of systems level things to make the whole thing fit together. Um, that's a challenge. And so for spacecraft that I've seen handle that successfully, it's much easier if the team is small. In fact, a small team can often achieve the same as a large team, but quicker if you get the right people in a small team. Knowing how many that is and what the right people are is really difficult. And if you're looking at your program and trying to assess, should I add more people or should I subtract people? That's a lot of experience of having been through different types of projects really matters. So the experienced leadership that's able to do those trades. And then culture. You've got to have everybody understanding that it's everyone's job to turn over every rock to find the opportunities to solve the problems, to keep the schedule, to shrink the schedule. Right? We don't just do risk management, we do risk and opportunity management. And trust me, you need those opportunities to recover from the risks you realize. If you're only looking at mitigating downside and not taking advantage of upside, when you realize some of the downside, things are gone, right? But if you realize some downside and you've worked to realize some upside, you can end up actually in a better place. And I have seen that with projects as well. Only once I've seen timelines move to the left, and that's an amazing dynamic when teams are able to deliver faster than the schedules. Especially on engineering, the rule is the work expands to fill the time that's in the schedule, and
That's
it
true.
takes it takes a
Yeah, I've
really
seen that many times. Yeah,
and it takes a really strong culture to break that paradigm and go in the other direction.
right. And that's yeah, that what you mentioned at the start of that comment about adding team members is not always the right answer. Basically, uh, I've seen that play out many times. So for our audience, if you have two people doing the work and you think you're going to double or cut the time in half by adding two more people, not going to happen. It just doesn't work that way. When you add those people, you increase the opportunities for communications challenges. There's a lot more um, just communication, time spent talking back and forth to make sure everybody's on the same page, things are happening. So adding people, sometimes obviously there's times when you have to, no doubt about it. But uh, think about that hard because when you add them, you're not going to get 100% out of everyone, at least hands on working on the project. Some of their time is going to be taken now bringing the other person on board and communication. So that's a big part of it. So, it, what are, with all that in mind, all, by the way, very good information for our audience about challenging projects. But what are maybe a handful of tips that you might give our audience about making sure that a project goes as smoothly as it can?
Gosh, I'm almost reminded of the first line of Anna Karenina. Right, every happy family looks the same, but every unhappy family is unhappy for a different reason. Um, if you find people who know what success looks like, who've seen that, and encourage a culture where they actually actively talk about what makes a good project and what doesn't, so that it's always top of mind of people. This decision that I'm making, is this what the project needs? Those are I think two of the biggest things. Um, the closest, like the most successful people who have done projects that are the closest to what you're doing, is one of the strongest indicators that your project will go well. You of course have to empower those people, but then also a team that is willing to listen and think and talk constantly about what does quality mean, what does our schedule mean, right? It's not something that we just do once a month at an offsite to think about strategy and planning, or that we entrust the PMO, the program management office, to do. It's something that everybody has to own, and keeping that constantly, like getting people that will just use their brains constantly and think about it, that's huge. Hiring for that, of course, is difficult, and you've got to be totally on top of what team you're, what culture you're hiring, and how to train them up in the culture that you've got and the good aspects of it.
Okay, so on every podcast, it seems like we try to ask a question about AI. So I know you already talked about some of the challenges from the security perspective about, being able to leverage some of the more advanced technologies and so forth. But how do you see AI maybe impacting the space industry, or maybe even your particular subsegment of the space industry?
Yeah, AI is getting just used more and more in different areas. The obvious place that it's being used in the space industry is the data analytics, and so the images and the like that are captured from orbit are being pre-processed on the spacecraft using AI systems. So then you're downloading insights, or you're downloading selected images and selected data. That means that your communications bandwidth, which is always limited, is much more efficiently used. And then once you get those insights to the ground, of course, put that into a system that pulls in data from everywhere, and is able to integrate with other systems. So there's a lot of hubris in the space industry. We don't have all the answers, and we need to integrate ideas, data, everything else from across the whole industry to provide the best insights. So that's one important thing. Another place that it's being used that's more close to home to the technology that we're testing, um, is on the cameras, for example, for docking two satellites together. So the guidance navigation systems, just like on cars, we're trying to build self-driving spacecraft that can dock. And I like to describe that there are companies now that are building tow trucks in orbit. Previously, this
Oh,
didn't
wow.
exist.
Yeah,
You
I have heard that.
Yeah, so previously you launched a satellite, you never touched it again, right? There was no way to service it. There was no way to get fuel to it. It was up there. If it broke, that was it, right? So it has to be insanely reliable. Now, people have said, well, we can build tow trucks and fix these satellites. Of course, if you have a tow truck and you don't have a gas station, your tow truck's going to tow a couple of satellites, and then you've got to throw the tow truck away. So fundamental to that business is what we're doing. But all of this is producing this need to cooperate and to dock in orbit. And so we need these self-driving spacecraft because they're on the other side of the world. They're moving around in orbit. Um, so people are coding that. The frame processing, the image processing, to understand where exactly is the satellite you're coming to dock to, especially for unstructured environments where the spacecraft weren't prepared, or they have an issue, maybe the solar array's gone floppy. You can't use a model that's pre-prepared because you don't know what the model of the spacecraft is. AI is pretty good for that, right? And so people are applying that to a lot of examples. If you want to land on the moon or on Mars, similar kind of thing. That's a nice unconstrained problem. I say nice in the term that drives our engineers bonkers. It's a complex problem that's quite amenable to an AI solution. So those are the kind of things where it's getting applied in space, and then across the business, of course. AI can help you write proposals, help with your marketing. It's great. They tend to be built on language models, so anything that requires language, they're good. They're not great at engineering. They're excellent at suggesting code, right? So these tools, we want to integrate them wherever we can. And yeah, finding solutions that can work in a secure environment is a challenge. But by the time they come in, the ones that I've seen, they're already well tested outside. So we do get good products and decent results.
Right. Yeah, that's so you're spot on in that there's certain, what we're seeing is that there are certain use cases where it's outstanding and really making a huge difference. And then there's other areas where, the quality is not quite there yet. Maybe they'll get there in a few more years. Coding is one of those that we've seen, by the way, since you brought that up, is that what we've uh, told our people and what we've kind of decided on internally here is we can we ask our folks to go ahead and use it um, in order to maybe get an idea of the syntax or how to quickly put kind of a boilerplate version of code together, and then they're to go take that and now make it more enterprise worthy. The error trapping and some of those kind of things that need to happen, just and make sure it's efficient. So we're finding lots of times the code is not as efficient as it could be. So sometimes the AI models will kind of take the easy way out, kind of thing, um, and often that leads to inefficiencies in the code. So it's getting there. It's not for everything yet. Although there are some other, as you're talking about, obviously they've made great progress from the automated driving perspective. When I seen them parallel parking, with just pressing a button and it's going to go parallel park for you, that's pretty phenomenal. That with all the sensors and with that AI training that they can do that. It's interesting you bring up the tow truck in space. So, kind of an interesting little tidbit. My brother owns one of the larger wrecker companies here in the metropolitan area. So, I'm going to have to go ask him if he's ready to go to space. That'll get him going. He'll think about that one a little bit.
It's been an interesting journey on this one because you can imagine that the paradigm shift. Like engineers are really good in the space industry at designing around fuel being the limiting factor, right? It's the one consumable on a satellite. You could put electric, all the electronics run on electricity generated by solar rays. But if you put a Tesla in space, you spin the wheels all day, there's nothing to push on, right? You can't move forward. You've got to bring the Earth with you. So you need propellant. And it's more about like a reaction mass that you're pushing against. So it's the one thing that runs out. And so the engineers are really good at handling that and getting the most out of it. And you come along and say, I could refuel you. And they say, well, I don't need to because I'm that good, right? And then you dig in and they go, well, of course there's an end of life to my satellite. And the marginal revenue, if I had an extra kilogram of fuel at the end of the life, would be $1 million per kilogram. It's like, and you don't think you want more fuel? Oh no, because I'm very good at getting to that last kilo. It's like, I think let me go talk to your CFO about this. So this paradigm shift is like the one thing we had to break. And we set the company up. It was a year or so before Space Force was set up. And so Space Force came along and they said, yeah, we've thought about this too when we're also great engineers and we buy from great engineers and we're good at this one tank of fuel. But I wish people would stop poking our satellites. We keep running out and we have to call a 2 or 3 star general if we want to move the satellite because it's going to reduce the amount of fuel it has and takes off lifetime at the end. And we're going to regret that. In fact, I heard the first Gulf War, the start date of that was dependent on how long it took to drift the communication satellite from where it was in orbit to over the Middle East. And they couldn't start until they had comms. How much lack of fuel in orbit is driving operationally that entire exercise. And that happens every day in the space industry. So breaking that, like bringing on tow trucks, bringing on refueling, bringing on just the ability to move and do things on orbit without regretting it, huge paradigm shift. And we just happened to get ahead of the curve and we've nailed it. Now we're picking up tens of millions of contracts with the government. We've got commercial companies buying it. It's timing. Being lucky on timing is great.
Well, timing is everything. I mean, as we all know, that's huge. So, what other challenge do you see uh, that still need to be addressed in the space industry, uh, especially those that you might think that technology, data, AI might be able to help?
Yeah, we're seeing more and more things done in space now with the costs dropping, the cycle times are lowering. There's more opportunities. A lot of it is directly on the data side. We're seeing comms move to orbit, and in a big way. A few years ago, there were a couple of thousand satellites in orbit. Now there are almost 10,000. It's on the way to being 100,000 and then probably a million. Now, space is big, space is very big, but these things are also moving very quickly. And there are some satellites, because we haven't had the gas stations, then we haven't had the tow trucks. We haven't had the tow trucks, we can't do debris collection. And it stays up there for a very long time, especially if and occasionally there's been collisions or explosions of old rocket bodies or even anti-satellite tests by some governments. It's put a lot of debris in orbit. We have to figure out where all of that is and be able to get out of the way of it. And you want to propagate that into the future and say, where should I, like, can I nudge myself now and not use too much fuel? Again, fuel is everyone thinks is valuable, right? How can I plan a trajectory so that I won't run into any of the 100,000 pieces of debris that are currently in the database? And we keep adding to them every day. That is a really interesting computational challenge.
Yeah, yeah, that really is.
So we're going to be throwing a whole bunch of techniques at that. A lot of them AI based, and people are trying to set up space traffic control. And how do you automate the response to that? Because Starlink are dodging so many pieces of debris every day, they can't have an operator looking at all of the upcoming conjunctions. So they have to be automating that. That's where we're at now, like just increasing those number of satellites. When we get to doing interesting things, when we have people in orbit and we are living in an environment that's completely artificial, like on the other side of a thin piece of aluminum is just a vacuum that'll be a bad day if it gets inside, right? Everything's got to work. Those systems are getting monitored by AI, looking for anything abnormal that might be indicative and trying to run the fault trees and what have you into with an AI system. A lot of that gets interesting. When we get to the moon or asteroids or Mars, be it a mining operation or science or living or what have you, those are all very complex, unstructured environments. And we're going to have to understand what the impact of that is and control all the systems we have that are operating in those environments. Some of them very critical, right? Some of them will have people on board. Just the ability to understand and process the data. Like we now have a great ability to capture that data. Sensors have become fantastic, and we end up in that region of do we have just information overload? This is where AI is super useful. So it's not in this way. It's not hugely different from Earth, right? You go to a mine site on Earth. It's easy to add more sensors and hard to process all the data, right? That's true in a lot of situations. You look at an aircraft. How many sensors are on that aircraft? They pipe that in real time back to a data center, and they're analyzing while they fly all of the aircraft in the world. We're going to be doing this exactly the same for satellites, exactly the same for mining in space. That's not where the pixie dust is. But AI is a tool that will get applied in space just as it's getting applied on Earth.
Yeah, it's amazing what they can do about being able to see the trajectory of objects and predict that path and so forth. I mean, we see it, with rockets being shot into Israel and the Iron Dome and all of that. Wow, it's amazing the technology that's in place there. That sounds like it would be very similar to what you're talking about. I mean, they're dodging rockets, you're dodging debris. Uh, wow, that's pretty amazing stuff. It's going to be very interesting to see how they address some of these issues. Um, you would think at some point there would have to start being some operations to go around and clean up some of that debris. Collect it. I don't know, do what with it, but at least try to get a handle on it to some degree. So that'll be very interesting.
There are a few companies working on active debris removal, they call it. It's basically the garbage collection satellites. One of them, a Japanese company, is operating globally and has run a bunch of demos and the like. They just went public a few weeks ago. So they're now a $500 million company doing not just the debris removal, but a whole bunch of other tow truck type services. And you can imagine that they're our customers. We work very closely with them. What we have is fairly fundamental to what they do. But they're on track to completely change how people think about operating in space, but also be able to clean up when things have gone wrong, which is important.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome. So a lot of great information today. We really appreciate you being on with us, Daniel, and taking the time. How can our folks uh, stay in touch with you, follow what you're doing, and so forth?
Yeah, thanks, David. Appreciate that. Find us on LinkedIn. Find us on the internet. I'm sure you'll put some links with the posts about this. Yeah, please do. And while we moved to Colorado because there was a great aerospace workforce here, and that's important from our engineers, we're running a business, right? I need accountants, I need marketing, I need legal, I need everything else. So for folks that are interested in the space industry, like the growth is huge. The opportunity is huge. Have a look at this sector for where your career might go as well. I encourage people to do that.
Awesome. That's a great way to close it out. Folks, if you have any questions about any of the things we've talked about or would like to reach out to us, here at Emphasis Tech, we deal with a lot of the data aspects. So be sure to reach out to us and we'll be happy to help at least point you in the right direction, answer your questions and so forth. You can do that through LinkedIn. And again, Daniel, we appreciate you, appreciate what you guys are doing. And to the rest of you, the audience, we'll see you next time.